Lakeshore Motel has 9 hours left before it is demolished. Elena Ramirez has $27.40. Her car is nearly out of gas. Sophia has not eaten dinner. Outside, the temperature has dropped below freezing, and the money in her pocket is only enough to solve one of the three matters. Elena knows exactly what each dollar can do. $10 helps the car run for 2 more days. $8 buys bread, eggs, and a discounted box of soup. The remainder is enough for mother and daughter to sit in the laundromat until almost dawn, where there is at least light and warmth. But that night, Elena did not drive to the gas station. She took Sophia back to room number 17. Mother and daughter walked around behind the Lakeshore Motor Inn, following the brick wall that had peeled in patches after many winters. Elena touched her staff card to the laundry room door. The card should have been deactivated 3 days earlier, but the old reader still blinked green if she held it tilted to the left. Sophia knew that. The child also knew to walk down the hallway without dragging her shoe soles, not to talk near the camera, and not to turn on the light until the room door was fully closed. Room number 17 was no longer on the list of rentable rooms. The ceiling had a leaf-shaped stain. The carpet near the window had a corner cut off. The heater only worked when Elena tapped twice on the right side of its metal casing with the handle of a spoon. But it was still the only place where Sophia could set her backpack down without having to hug it while she slept. Stay with Elena and Sophia as this night unfolds. If stories about ordinary people fighting for one more chance in life mean something to you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the heartfelt stories still to come. On the table were 2 plastic containers, one holding half a portion of noodles from the day before, the other holding 3 slices of apple that Elena had sprinkled with lemon juice so they would not turn brown. Elena did not call that place home. She told Sophia they were only staying there temporarily until her wages were paid in full. That sentence had been repeated for 19 nights, and each time Elena tried to keep her voice normal, as if the day of leaving were already marked on a calendar. Sophia had never asked why a temporary place needed a toothbrush hidden inside a tissue box. Nor did she ask why every morning her mother had to fold the blanket into a small rectangle and tuck it behind the board under the bed. Children often understand the truth sooner than adults would wish. They only pretend not to understand yet, to protect the person who is trying to protect them. Sophia set her backpack on the chair and took a brass key out of her pencil case. The key did not open room number 17. It was older than the building itself, its teeth worn down, with the number 214 engraved on its head. Gabriel, Sophia's father, used to wear it on a cord inside his shirt. After he passed away, Elena intended to put the key away in the folder of documents, but Sophia kept it and said that a person should have at least one thing that could open a door, even without knowing yet where that door was. Elena took the $27.40 out of her jacket pocket, laid it on the table, and divided it into 3 portions. She pushed $10 to the left for gas, $8 to the right for food. The remainder sat in the middle, too small to be called a plan. After a few seconds, she took back $5 from the gas portion, folded it in half, and tucked it into Sophia's coat pocket. "Tomorrow you buy lunch." Sophia looked at the box of cookies in her backpack. "I still have food." Inside were only 2 cookies broken into small pieces. Elena did not expose that lie. She took a slice of apple, took a very small bite, then placed the rest into her daughter's container, as if she was eating little only because she was not yet hungry. At the same moment, less than 4 miles from room number 17, Adrian Cole was on the top floor of the building bearing his name. He did not live there, but on the 68th floor there was still a private room to rest in between long meetings, with a bathroom floor heated from below, 3 new shirts always hung ready, and a dining room where the corporation's chef could prepare anything after just 1 phone call. That evening, a portion of roasted beef, mashed potatoes, and a bottle of wine taken from his private cellar had been set before Adrian. The walnut wood table had 8 chairs. Only 1 was pulled out. Below the building, the driver waited in a sedan that had been pre-warmed. Another SUV followed behind on long trips, mostly to carry documents and luggage. Adrian did not know how much fuel was left in either car, nor did he remember the last time he had stood in front of a gas pump himself. Such matters were resolved before he ever became aware they existed. Adrian's phone could open office doors in 5 cities. A control panel on his desk let him view the temperature, power, and security status of thousands of apartments. On some nights, he sat in a room kept at exactly 22 degrees, signing decisions concerning doors he had never once walked through. Lakeshore Motor Inn was just one line among them. 48 rooms. An old laundry area. Nearly 2 acres of land lying next to a road whose value was rising. The cost of maintaining the building had exceeded its revenue 3 years earlier, and the replacement project promised a profit large enough that no one in the meeting would need to ask who this place once housed. The next morning, at 6:30, the excavator would begin at the east wing. Adrian had signed that order 3 weeks earlier. He had just reached for his coat when his phone buzzed. A message from the head of security contained only a photo of a dark hallway, at the far end of which was a thin strip of light seeping out from under the door of room 17. The attached report noted that the building had been inspected twice and had no remaining occupants. Adrian zoomed in on the photo. That strip of light did not make him think of an intruder. It reminded him of another night, long before his name sat atop buildings, when his mother rolled up a towel to block the gap under the door so the motel manager would not realize the 3 of them were still inside. Adrian opened the drawer beneath his desk. Behind the leather-bound contracts was a small, unlabeled wooden box. He took out from it a brass key that had turned dull with age, its head engraved with the number 213, then gripped it in his palm as the elevator doors closed. 17 minutes later, the black sedan stopped in front of the Lakeshore Motor Inn. The driver got out, intending to open the door, but Adrian had already done it himself. Wind off Lake Michigan struck his face directly, carrying small, dry flakes of snow. Only 3 bulbs still worked in the row of hallway lights, making the motel look more forgotten than the number recorded in the report. Behind the temporary fence, 2 excavators sat still under gray tarps. On the arm of the first machine, the Cole Urban Holdings logo was still new. Adrian stood looking at it for a few seconds. Tomorrow morning, his name would sit on both the demolition order and the remaining rubble. Curtis, the head of security, had been waiting in the lobby. He handed Adrian a thin file, explaining that the inspection team had gone through all the rooms 3 days earlier. No personal belongings. No sign of occupancy. The strip of light under room 17's door could just be electrical leakage from the hallway or a bulb not fully switched off. Adrian did not open the file. He asked who was holding the master key. Curtis held out a large key ring, but Adrian did not take it. He walked toward the east hallway, where the carpet had been peeled up in sections in preparation for teardown. The smell of dust, cleaning agent, and damp wood mixed together. At the end of the hallway, the door of room 17 looked no different from the other doors, except for a thin line of light lying close to the floor. Inside, Elena had already heard the sound of the car. She turned off the heater, pulled Sophia from the chair, and gathered the 2 food containers into a cloth bag. These movements happened fast enough to be almost unthinking. The toothbrush was tucked into the tissue box, the blanket folded in 3, clothes from the hook in the bathroom pressed down into the bottom of the suitcase. Over 19 nights, Elena had trained herself to turn a room lived in by 2 people into an empty room in under 4 minutes. Sophia stood by the door, hugging her backpack to her chest. "Is it Mr. Walter?" Elena placed a finger on her daughter's lips, then took one last look around. On the table, coins still sat uncollected. A slice of apple lay in the plastic container. Under the chair leg was the paper house Sophia had folded from an advertisement flyer for Cole Urban Holdings' new project, its roof colored yellow with pencil. The sound of footsteps stopped outside the door. Elena turned off the light. The room sank into darkness, but the strip of light under the door gap remained, because the small bathroom light had not been switched off in time. She realized this the moment the sound of metal touching the lock rang out. Sophia pressed close against her mother, her small hand gripping the brass key inside the pencil case so tightly that its teeth pressed marks into her skin. Adrian raised his hand to stop Curtis from opening the door. He knocked 3 times. No one answered. He knocked again, slower. "I know someone is inside." Elena looked at Sophia. She had imagined this moment many times, but in every version, the person arriving was Walter. He would stand outside the door, bring up the missing hours on the timesheet, remind her that she had no official contract, then say that with just one phone call, Child Protective Services would know where Sophia had been sleeping for nearly 3 weeks. Elena opened the door just enough to stand blocking the frame. The man in front of her was not wearing a security uniform. A dark wool coat, shoes with no mud on them, and the stance of someone who had never had to ask permission to step into any place. Behind him were Curtis and 2 other staff members. Elena understood at once this was not a routine inspection. "We'll be gone before morning," she said. Adrian looked past her shoulder. He could only see part of the room, but every detail was clearer than any report. The suitcase already zipped shut, 2 paper cups washed clean and set upside down by the sink, children's shoes tucked against the foot of the bed, and a bag of food tied with a rubber band. "Is there a child here?" Elena shifted her body to the left. "No." Sophia coughed softly behind her. The sound was very small, but enough that Elena's words no longer had any ground to stand on. Curtis stepped forward, noting that the building had been sealed and that residing inside was illegal. Adrian did not turn to look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on Elena's hand, gripping the edge of the door. Her knuckles were pale white, but when her voice came out, it stayed steady. "I work here. The motel has been closed for 3 weeks. I still work after it closed." Elena did not explain further. She had learned that the more a poor person spoke in front of those who held decision-making power, the easier it was to turn herself into a file full of contradictions. She only opened the door a little further, enough for Sophia to step out if they were forced to leave, but the child did not step out. Adrian saw the little girl for the first time. Sophia wore her coat even inside the room. One arm hugged her backpack, the other hidden behind her back. Her face did not carry the drowsiness of a child woken in the middle of the night. It carried the alertness of someone already used to waiting for footsteps outside the door. Adrian knew that look. He had once seen it in a mirror at 8 years old. "Does she have school tomorrow?" he asked. Elena froze. But the surprise lasted only one breath, before the wall in her eyes rebuilt itself at once. "That is none of your business." From behind her mother, Sophia accidentally dropped the brass key. It hit the floor, spun twice, then stopped right in front of the toe of Adrian's shoe. The number 214 faced up under the hallway light. The hand Adrian had resting in his coat pocket closed tightly around the key marked 213, while Elena bent down quickly. But he had already knelt before her and picked up the small object. The key sat resting in Adrian's palm, light enough that its weight did not match what had just settled onto his chest. He did not need to wipe the faint dust off the brass surface to see the number 214 clearly. The engraved lines were old, the edge of the 4 slightly chipped at the right corner, exactly the type of key once used at the boarding house on West Walnut Street more than 30 years ago. Adrian still remembered the old manager sitting in front of the maintenance room, using a small chisel to carve numbers onto each keyhead, smoking while he worked, ash falling onto the concrete floor. Elena held out her hand. "Give it back to her." Adrian looked up. In the yellow light of the hallway, the wariness on her face had shifted. It was no longer only the fear of being driven out. The way she looked at the key showed that the object belonged to a part of her life she did not want any stranger to touch. He placed it in her palm without asking further. Sophia stepped forward, quickly took the key back, and tucked it deep into her pocket. The child did not know why the man in front of her had suddenly looked at her for so long. She only understood that adults usually paid attention to a child's belonging when they intended to take it away, so her hand kept a tight hold on the fabric outside her pocket. Adrian stood up. Behind him, Curtis began repeating the site's safety regulations, but that voice grew distant. He looked over the room once more. On the small table, the money Elena had just divided still sat in 3 groups. 5 $1 bills folded in half. A few coins lined up at the edge of the table. One portion had clearly been taken from elsewhere and moved into the child's coat pocket. He asked whether the heater was still working. Elena looked at him as if it were a trap. "It's enough." Adrian stepped over the threshold after she moved back half a step. The heater under the window let out a dry, rattling sound, then went silent. On its metal casing were 2 small dents in the same spot, a sign that someone had had to tap it many times. He crouched down, touched the weak stream of air blowing out, then looked at the blanket folded too neatly at the foot of the bed. No suitcase was fully open. No item was placed in the most convenient spot. Mother and daughter lived in the room like people, always ready to vanish before being discovered. Clean clothes were hidden behind the shower curtain. The food container had no store name, only small pieces of paper taped on marked Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. In the trash bin was a soup box that had been cut in half to scrape out the last of its contents. Sophia bent down and picked up the paper house from under the chair leg. It was a piece of advertising from Adrian's own corporation. The outer side printed images of glass balconies, a fitness room, and a line about an upscale living community soon to be built on this land. Sophia had folded the paper into a small house. The roof was colored yellow with pencil, and on the back were the construction cost figures Adrian had once approved in under 2 minutes. "Did you make this?" he asked. Sophia nodded but did not hand it to him. Elena zipped the suitcase shut and set it by the door. That gesture showed she had already understood how this inspection would end. She did not cry, did not speak of her late husband or the months of underpaid work. She only took the wool hat from the bed, put it on her daughter's head, and pulled it down to cover both ears. "We need 10 minutes. Curtis looked at Adrian, waiting for a nod. Outside, the wind made the tarp over the excavator flap. A security staff member had already opened his phone to call the night shift team, while Sophia began stuffing her pencil case into her backpack. She moved very slowly, as if drawing out each motion could hold the room together a few seconds longer. Under the table, Adrian saw a pair of women's shoes worn down at the heel. Beside them was a grocery store receipt, a notice from school, and a timesheet folded into quarters. On the timesheet was the name Elena Ramirez, but many workdays were crossed out in red pen. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten line stated that those hours were not confirmed because the employee did not appear in the system. "How long have you worked here?" Elena placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "That doesn't change the fact that we're standing in a room that isn't ours." "How long?" She smoothed the edge of the school notice before answering. 11 months. Adrian looked at the timesheet. 11 months cleaning rooms other people paid to sleep in, then 19 nights hiding her child in a room removed from the listings. He bent down to pick up the paper, but Elena immediately stepped forward and held onto the other corner. "That's mine. Someone altered the work hours. You don't need to know." "What's the manager's name?" Elena did not answer. Her hand gripped so tightly the fold nearly tore. Adrian let go first. He turned to Curtis and asked who was responsible for personnel at Lakeshore after the motel closed. Curtis opened the file and read out the name Walter Green. The moment that name was spoken, Sophia stopped zipping her backpack. Elena did not look at her daughter, but Adrian had already seen the reaction. A silence too clear to still be called coincidence. He took out his phone, opened the demolition schedule, and canceled the 6:30 confirmation. Then he called the project lead, ordering that all machinery remain stopped until further notice. Curtis stepped closer. "Mr. Cole, the contract has." Elena looked up upon hearing that name. Her gaze moved from Curtis to Adrian, then settled on the small logo stitched inside his coat collar. She looked at the paper house in Sophia's hand, at the words Cole Urban Holdings still visible under the fold, and finally understood that the man standing in the middle of room number 17 was not a staff member sent to inspect. He was the owner of the building, also the one who had signed the order to tear it down. Elena pulled Sophia close against her. "So it was you who decided this place had to disappear." Adrian did not deny it. He looked at the paper house in Sophia's hand, where his corporation's name had been folded inward, leaving only the yellow roof and one small window colored slightly off. 3 weeks earlier, when he had put pen to paper on the demolition order, he had seen only maintenance costs, land value, and a projected profit figure. No line in the file said that a child was sleeping here with her coat still on. No box accounted for 2 containers of food divided by day. "Yes," he said, "I signed that order." Elena nodded very faintly, not because she accepted the confession, but because what she had suspected finally had a clear shape. The man in front of her had not stumbled by chance into mother and daughter's hardship. His name was on the fence, on the excavator, and on the advertisement Sophia had used to fold a house she had never had. "So you've seen it now," Elena said. "We'll go." She bent down to lift the suitcase. One wheel had broken, tilting the suitcase to one side and dragging a dry scraping sound across the floor. That sound passed through Adrian like something sharp. He had once heard that exact sound in another hallway, in a winter 35 years earlier, when his mother tried to pull the family's only suitcase down the stairs without letting her 2 sons realize she was crying. Adrian was 8 years old then. His mother, Miriam Cole, used to set 2 plates on the table even when the cupboard held only enough food for one person. She divided the mashed potatoes into 2 halves, placed them in front of Adrian and his younger brother, and said she had already eaten at work. Adrian believed that, until he saw her standing by the sink, drinking 2 cups of water in a row to fill the emptiness in her stomach. They lived in room 213 of the boarding house on West Walnut Street. The room was so small that when the fold-out bed was opened, the closet door could not swing fully open. In winter, cold air seeped in around the window frame. Miriam rolled up a towel to block the gap under the door and told her sons it was a way to keep the room warmer. She did not say that the towel also kept the light from spilling into the hallway after the hours the manager required them to be quiet. To reduce her rent, Miriam cleaned vacant rooms in the mornings before heading to the laundry factory. Room 214 had had no occupant for months. When its lock was replaced, the manager handed Miriam the old key and told her to throw it away. She kept it, perhaps because poor people rarely discard an object still whole in shape, even when it can no longer open any door. Rent on room 213 was 12 days overdue. Miriam had asked for one more week. The manager gave her until the next morning. That night, she placed 2 brass keys on the table. The one marked 213 was given to Adrian. The 214 was hung around his younger brother's neck on a brown shoelace. Miriam did not call them keys to be discarded. She said each of her sons should keep one, so that later, when she found another place, they would know they still belonged to some door. The next morning, the lock on room 213 was changed. Mother and sons stood in the hallway with a suitcase missing one wheel, 2 bags of clothes, and a tin box of documents. Miriam did not pound on the door. Nor did she beg in front of her children. She only bent down to fasten the buttons on her younger son's coat, then told Adrian to hold his brother's hand tightly while she went to find a phone. By noon, a social worker arrived. Miriam no longer had enough money for another room. No relative answered the phone. The family shelter had no beds left. The woman holding the file said the 2 boys might have to stay in 2 different places for a few days, only until Miriam got her life stabilized. Adrian was sent to a family in the north of the city. His brother was moved to another district. In the first week, Adrian slept still gripping the key marked 213. He believed his mother would come for him if he kept hold of the thing that had once opened the old room's door. Miriam tried. She found a second job at a packing factory and sent 3 letters to the welfare agency. 2 were returned because the boys' files had been separated under 2 different surnames. 7 months later, on her way from the night shift to the morning shift, she was struck by a delivery truck at an ice-covered intersection. Miriam died before the final hearing on custody of her sons. No one explained it to Adrian in a way a child could understand. He was only told his mother would not be coming. A few days of temporary separation stretched into 35 years. Adrian kept the key marked 213 through every move. It sat in his pocket the day he took out his first loan. Sat in his desk drawer the day the company hired its 100th employee. Sat in the wooden box on the 68th floor, where no one knew a billionaire still kept the object that once opened a room that no longer existed. Now, the key marked 214 was in Sophia's pocket. Adrian looked at the suitcase Elena was pulling. The broken wheel kept scraping across the floor, in the exact rhythm of the sound he had tried to forget. "Don't take her out into the night tonight," he said. Elena stopped but did not turn around. "Tomorrow morning you'll still tear this place down." "No. You just said you signed the order yourself, and I just stopped it." Curtis stepped forward, noting that postponing the demolition would require paperwork, notice to the contractor, and confirmation from the legal department. Adrian took out his phone and sent a formal directive right in front of him. The machinery was to stop. No one was to enter the East Wing. All lock changes were forbidden until a new inspection took place. Elena still kept her hand on the suitcase handle. 7 days, Adrian said. "You and Sophia stay here 7 days. No one touches this room." Elena turned around. "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for nothing." She looked at him for a long moment, then bent down to pick the timesheet up off the floor. As the paper unfolded, an old photograph slipped out from the fold, landing face down near Adrian's foot. He bent down and picked it up, looking at a young man in a worksite coat holding Sophia when she was still an infant. On the back, in blue ink now faded, there was only one name: Gabriel. Adrian read the name once more, as though staring long enough could make the faded ink strokes assemble themselves into an answer. The man in the photo was very young. A thin face, short cropped hair, a small scar running close to the left eyebrow. He was holding Sophia with both hands, careful enough that his elbows were tense, while the baby slept peacefully in a yellow blanket. Adrian did not recognize that face, but he recognized the way the man tilted his head while looking at the child. Adrian's younger brother, as a boy, used to tilt his head the same way whenever he tried to listen for a distant sound. He would often stand by the window of room 213, head slightly leaning left, waiting for the sound of Miriam's footsteps in the hallway. It was a gesture too small to exist in any file, too private for a stranger to unknowingly repeat. Elena took the photo out of his hand. My husband. She placed it back among the folds of the timesheet without further explanation. Adrian did not ask right away either. Gabriel was not a rare name. A key with a consecutive number could be coincidence. A familiar gesture could simply be the kind of memory a person invents when they have searched for too long. But his hand still did not leave his coat pocket. Inside, the key marked 213 had warmed to the temperature of his body. Curtis stood near the door, waiting for the next decision. The two security staff behind him began glancing at each other, unsure whether to leave or continue following procedure. Adrian ordered that no one enter room 17 without Elena's consent. He also told Curtis to have someone check the heating system and bring a new lock that same night. Elena looked up. A new lock for what? So only you have the key. She did not answer. Her gaze moved from Adrian to the door, then settled on Sophia. The child still hugged her backpack, but her shoulders had eased down slightly. Through 19 nights, any sound of footsteps in the hallway could mean the room no longer belonged to them. A new lock did not turn this place into a home. But it could let a child know that tonight, once the door closed, no one outside would open it on their own. Adrian stepped out into the hallway first. He did not want Elena to keep talking with 4 men standing in a room barely larger than a garage. Curtis followed, carrying the still unopened file. Once the door closed, Adrian asked where the entire personnel file for Lakeshore was being kept. The ground floor management office, Curtis said. Most of it has already been moved to storage. Payroll records? Held by Walter Green until the liquidation is complete. Adrian checked his watch. Nearly 10 at night. Call him in. Curtis hesitated. Walter had managed the motel for close to 17 years and had been kept on after the building closed to help hand over assets and records. In internal reports, he was described as someone who understood Lakeshore better than anyone. No formal complaint was currently open. No wage dispute had been recorded. Adrian had read sentences like that thousands of times before. A system always looks cleanest on paper when the person harmed does not feel safe enough to put their own name on a complaint form. In room 17, Elena still stood by the door after the footsteps had faded away. She did not know why Adrian had looked at Gabriel's photo as though he had just heard a sound echoing up from the past. Nor did she know whether the 7 days he had just given them truly existed or would only last until the corporation's lawyers found a way to take it back. Sophia set the paper house on the table. Is he going to tear it down again? Elena checked the old lock once more, even though she knew the latch was loose. Not tonight. That was as much as she dared promise. Out in the hallway, a maintenance worker brought a new lock along with 2 keys. Adrian took them, then placed both into Elena's palm. She turned the latch 3 times to test it, not out of doubt toward the worker. She had lived too long in places where a door only meant something once her own hand confirmed it could lock. 28 minutes later, a pickup truck stopped in front of the lobby. Walter Green walked in with his coat not fully buttoned, wearing the irritation of a man pulled from home over a matter he believed had long been resolved. He was around 60, heavy-set, with gray hair combed back and metal-framed glasses that kept sliding down his nose. The moment he saw Adrian, Walter's tone changed at once, apologizing for not knowing the chairman would come to inspect in person. Adrian set Elena's timesheet on the front desk counter. Walter recognized the paper without needing to read the name. Only a brief instant, but enough for his hand, mid-removing a glove, to stop. Ms. Ramirez says she's worked here 11 months. Walter pushed his glasses up. She's seasonal labor, not on the official payroll. Was she paid in full? Certainly. Adrian opened the timesheet. The days crossed out in red sat between shifts that had been signed off. Next to them, the laundry room access code and the room numbers cleaned. He placed a finger on 1 week showing 52 hours worked but only 18 hours recorded. Walter looked at the paper longer than necessary. Could be a system error. Right at that moment, a door opened behind the counter. Elena had come down from the hallway, one hand holding Sophia, the other holding a brown envelope worn at the edges. She set the envelope on the counter and pulled out 17 pay stubs and a small notebook recording dates, room numbers, and the number of towels changed each shift. Walter looked at the notebook, then looked at Elena. She smoothed flat the first page, where his signature appeared right next to 3 shifts that had been erased. You said it was a system error, Elena said. Then explain to me why your signature falls exactly on the days my money disappeared. Walter did not look at Elena right away. He looked at the notebook first, then at the pay stubs arranged by date on the counter. Each slip of paper held only a few numbers, but placed side by side, they formed something harder to erase than data in a computer. Elena had recorded room numbers, start times, end times, and even the ruined towels that had to be carried down to the basement. She wrote them down because she no longer trusted the timesheet. She kept them because a person who cannot afford a lawyer often has to become her own witness for her own life. Walter pulled the chair out but did not sit. He said the signature only confirmed that work had been assigned, not the full amount of time Elena claimed. Some rooms had to be redone. Some shifts ran long because staff worked slowly. The motel had been struggling for months, and seasonal workers all knew that hours were only counted after the manager reviewed them. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting. She opened the notebook to October 14th. Room 22 had a torn bedsheet. Room 31 had a guest who spilled wine on the carpet. Room 8 took nearly 2 hours because the bathtub overflowed. Beside each line was the first letter of Walter's name, the very initial he required staff to obtain before moving on to the next room. That day I worked 11 hours, Elena said. The pay stub shows 4. Walter gave a faint laugh, but there was nothing amused in the sound. He said anyone could write a notebook after the fact. He also said Elena should be careful, since her staying secretly in a motel room could make any of her statements look like retaliation. Sophia stood close beside her mother. The child did not fully understand the word retaliation, but she understood the way Walter lowered his voice when speaking about room number 17. It was the same voice that used to send Elena back to the room after each shift with her hands trembling, only for her to still smile when her daughter asked whether payday had come yet. Adrian pulled the notebook toward himself. He did not ask Elena whether she had any other evidence. He turned to Curtis and requested the access card data for the past 11 months be opened, including the laundry room door, the towel storage, and every room assigned to Elena. He then called the corporation's head of finance, waking her in the middle of the night and requesting a full backup of Lakeshore's payroll before any account could be edited. Walter took off his glasses. For the first time since stepping into the lobby, the irritation on his face gave way to a brief blankness. He said there was no need to turn an administrative error into a company-wide investigation. If Elena really had been shorted a few hours, he was willing to recalculate and pay it out that same week. Elena looked at the pay stubs. Not a few hours. She added up each figure on the small calculator Sophia used for school. 286 hours had vanished over 11 months. Not counting the times Walter had asked her to come in early to prepare the carts or stay late washing towels without clocking in. That amount of money was enough to cover several months' rent on a small apartment. Enough to fix the car. Enough that Sophia would not have to learn to sleep while still wearing her coat. Adrian did not say he would hand her the money right away. The money taken from Elena was not a gift for a billionaire to bestow. It was money she had earned by standing night after night in the smell of bleach, by wrists swollen from wringing towels, by mornings taking her daughter to school after only 3 hours of sleep. Giving it back was not kindness. It was only correcting something that never should have happened. On the computer screen behind the counter, the card access data began appearing. Every time Elena had opened the laundry room door, a specific time was logged. On some nights, the card was used at 11:48 p.m., yet the payroll recorded the shift as ending at 9. On some mornings, she had entered room 6 before 7, while the system logged the start at 10. The rows of data stretched from one page to the next. Curtis stopped flipping through the file. Walter said Elena might have lent her card to someone else, but the hallway cameras still had old footage stored. In each frame, Elena pushed the towel cart through the doors at exactly the times recorded in her notebook. Not one day. Not 1 week. Almost the entire year. Adrian recalled a Department of Labor report that had once sat in the company's legal files. In fiscal year 2025, the agency responsible for wage standards had closed 16,924 investigation and enforcement cases, recovering exactly $259,294,764 in back wages for 176,957 workers nationwide. Numbers that large could easily become just one row on a screen. But the money withheld from Elena did not live on a screen. It lived in the $5 she had taken from the gas money to tuck into her daughter's coat pocket. Adrian ordered Walter's system access revoked immediately. Walter stepped back from the counter, his voice starting to rise. He said he had saved Lakeshore from running losses by cutting unnecessary costs. He said seasonal staff often inflated their hours. He said Adrian was choosing to trust someone living illegally in company property over the man who had managed this place for 17 years. Adrian did not argue. He instructed Curtis to collect the office keys, work phone, and any device holding personnel files. Walter set the keyring down on the counter hard enough that one key popped loose, slid across the wood, and landed beside Elena's notebook. As Curtis led him out, Sophia finally let go of her mother's coat. Elena still stood upright, but her fingertips had reddened from gripping the edge of the counter too long. She looked at the total hours on the screen as though she still could not believe that months once lost could be acknowledged by someone else simply because they had just appeared in black on white. The finance officer called back a few minutes later. In the old data archive was a file not part of the current payroll system. It was a list of people once hired to repair Lakeshore 8 years earlier, before Adrian's corporation acquired the motel. One name appeared in the steel structure records, along with the address of an old Foster placement and a signature confirming receipt of the utility room key. Adrian opened the file. On the 13th line was the name Gabriel Cole. The slant of the signature, tilted to the left, reminded him of the way his younger brother used to write his own name with a short stub of a pencil on the floor of room 213. Beneath that name was an old case code, the address of a children's foster placement in Waukesha, and a birth year matching the year Adrian's younger brother had been taken out of the city. Adrian did not touch the screen. He only stood looking, both hands resting on the edge of the counter, while memories he had thought worn smooth by time suddenly turned sharp enough to almost cut into skin. A 6-year-old boy, with hair that always fell across his forehead. A boy who hid half a cookie in his pocket to save for his mother. A boy led up into a pale blue car, twisting around to look at Adrian through the window until the street disappeared entirely. In the file in front of him, the name entered was Gabriel Cole. But a note showed that name had only been used after the second placement transfer. The birth surname did not appear in the labor file. Accessing the original Foster record required a legal request, proof of relation, and consent from the nearest next of kin. The nearest next of kin was standing less than 3 steps from Adrian. Elena was still looking at her total hours worked. She had not seen the other screen that had just been opened, nor did she know the man in front of her had stopped thinking about the withheld wages the moment her husband's name appeared. "Where was Gabriel born?" Adrian asked. Elena looked up. She closed the notebook, placing her hand over the pay stubs as though the conversation had just stepped outside the one area she allowed him to enter. "What does that have to do with my wages? There's an old file bearing his name." Elena looked at the screen, but Adrian had already tilted the computer away before Sophia could read it. He did not want a child to see her father spoken of as a line of data with a case number. "He worked here once," Elena said. "Many years ago. And before that?" She fell silent. Gabriel rarely spoke of his childhood. He remembered many addresses, but called none of them home. On some nights, waking up, he would check the front door twice, then touch the key beneath his shirt. Elena had once asked what it opened. Gabriel only said he was still trying to remember. "He grew up in the foster system," she said. "That's all I know." Adrian closed the file. He understood he could pursue that secret later, while Elena still had to wake the next morning to find money for her daughter's lunch. He called Monica Vance, the corporation's legal director. Monica listened to all of it: the card data, the timesheet, the pay stubs. She asked 3 questions about the backup process, 2 about employment status, and 1 about Elena's residency situation. Once she learned Elena was living in company property, Monica's tone turned careful. She said the company had to keep the 2 matters separate. The wage dispute could not be used as leverage to get Elena out of the room, and the temporary right to stay could not be turned into a reward for her agreeing to stay silent. Adrian looked at Elena. "You'll have your own lawyer." "I can't afford a lawyer." "You're not paying me." He explained the corporation would cover the fee for an independent legal office, but the lawyer would represent only her. Every decision about filing suit, negotiating, or making the matter public would belong to Elena. He would not hand her a check in exchange for a signed release of liability. Verified wages would be repaid separately. Any other claims would be assessed by her own lawyer. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She had been offered money before to overlook things that should never have been overlooked. Walter had once left an envelope on the towel cart, calling it a private thank you for someone who knew how to keep internal matters quiet. Elena did not take it. The following week, 60 hours vanished from her timesheet. "Can that lawyer sue your own company?" "Yes. And you'd still pay the fee?" Adrian nodded. Elena requested that everything just said be put in writing before she signed anything. Adrian told Monica to prepare it that very night. Nearly half an hour later, Sophia had fallen asleep in the chair beside the counter, her head resting on her backpack. Elena took off her scarf, rolled it up, and placed it under her daughter's cheek. Her movements had slowed as the tension began draining from her body, leaving behind an exhaustion that had been postponed for months. The finance department sent a preliminary calculation. The total amount Elena might be owed came to $6,749.32, including unpaid regular hours, night shift differentials, overtime, and several amounts that had been logged but never appeared on any pay stub. The figure did not yet include late payment interest or penalties should authorities determine a violation had occurred. Elena read it over 3 times. She did not think of new clothes. She thought of the car needing a new belt, the deposit for renting an apartment, and Sophia's winter shoes growing short at the toe. She thought of the $5 she had just taken from the gas money, something small enough that Adrian might not have noticed, yet large enough to decide whether her daughter ate lunch. Curtis's phone buzzed on the counter. He listened for a few seconds, then looked at Adrian. Walter had just called the city inspector, reporting a minor living illegally in a building deemed unsafe. An inspection team, along with an emergency on-call social worker, had been dispatched to Lakeshore. Elena heard every word. Her hand landed on Sophia's shoulder at once, waking her before Adrian could even speak. Outside the glass doors, red and blue lights were already reflecting off the snow in front of the lobby, and Sophia, eyes barely open, asked in a still drowsy voice, "Are they here to take me away from you?" Elena did not answer right away. She pulled Sophia close, one hand holding her daughter's shoulder, the other already reaching for the suitcase handle beside the counter. In her mind, every plan rearranged itself in a matter of seconds. If they were told to leave the motel, she would grab the blanket, the documents, and the food container. If the social worker asked where they would sleep, she would say the car still ran. She did not know whether a nearly empty gas tank counted as a plan, but poor people often had to call anything not yet fully collapsed a plan. "No one is taking you anywhere," Elena said. She said it for Sophia to hear, not because she was certain. The lights outside the lobby swept across the glass, then stopped. 2 city inspectors stepped in first, followed by a woman in a dark blue coat carrying a thin file. She introduced herself as Claire Bennett, the night-on-call family support worker. She did not look at Elena as someone at fault. But her gaze moved quickly over the suitcase, Sophia's backpack, and the blanket rolled under the chair. Adrian stepped between them and the front desk. He explained the report had been filed by a manager whose access had just been suspended over suspected wage violations. He also said Lakeshore belonged to him, and the demolition order had been halted. Such statements were usually enough to change the direction of a meeting. But the lead inspector only opened her tablet and said ownership did not make safety responsibility disappear. The building was no longer operational. The fire alarm system in the east wing had not been inspected. Several pipes had already been shut off in preparation for demolition. If room 17 did not meet minimum conditions, Elena and Sophia could not stay simply because Adrian permitted it. Elena listened to every sentence without looking at him. She had known for a long time that money could open many doors, but not always the right one someone else needed. Adrian could stop the excavator. He could not turn a deteriorating room into a legal residence just by saying it belonged to him. Claire crouched down to Sophia's eye level. She did not ask if the child was afraid. She asked what Sophia would need to bring to school the next morning. Sophia looked at her mother before answering that there was a math test and a paper house model not yet finished. Claire noted it down, then asked whether the child had eaten tonight. Sophia said she still had cookies. Elena opened the food bag, took out the noodle container and the 3 apple slices, and set them on the counter as if presenting proof that she had not let her daughter go hungry. Claire did not ask for an explanation. She only asked whether Elena had any relatives who could take them in for the night. No, a single word, but it held 6 years since Gabriel had passed away. Phone calls growing fewer. Friends who once promised to always be there moving to other cities. Co-workers living in apartments too cramped to fit an extra mattress. Elena did not blame them. She simply had no name left to say. The 2 inspectors went up with Curtis. Adrian called Monica again. He did not ask her to find a way to force the city to let Elena stay. He asked for a safe place, near Sophia's school, that would not require Elena to sign a liability release and would not send mother and daughter out looking like people just caught in the act. Monica was quiet for a few seconds, then said the corporation still had 3 unused model apartments at Harbor Point, less than 2 miles from Lakeshore. Adrian told her to have one ready that same night. Elena heard and immediately shook her head. "I won't take an apartment from you. Just for 7 days." "And after 7 days?" Adrian did not answer right away. Elena looked at him with the eyes of someone who had learned that a promise with no 8th day was still just a way of postponing fear. She did not want Sophia to wake up in a beautiful apartment, start believing it was home, then a week later have to fold the blanket back into a suitcase. Monica arrived at Lakeshore just as the inspectors came back down. She brought a laptop, a set of contracts, and Milwaukee's latest housing report. While waiting for the safety conclusion, Monica set on the counter a figure Adrian had once viewed only as market data, an average rent of around $1,250 a month. To keep that rent from exceeding the cost burden threshold, a household needed an income of roughly $50,000 a year. Elena did not know how many apartments that $1,250 figure was drawn from. She only knew that the nearest landlord had once asked for over $2,000, including deposit, application fee, and first month's rent, before handing over a key. That amount was larger than what she could set aside after food, gas, and childcare. That was why room number 17 was not the best option. It was the only option that did not demand money right at the door. The inspectors confirmed room 17's heater did not meet code and that the east exit was partially blocked. Mother and daughter could not sleep there again. Sophia did not cry. She only turned back toward the hallway, where the paper house still sat on the table. Elena asked for 5 minutes to gather their things. Claire went with her, but stopped outside the door to let mother and daughter manage on their own. Adrian watched the suitcase being pulled across the lobby for the second time that night. He pulled Monica aside and said Lakeshore could no longer be handled as an empty lot. The East Wing needed to be reassessed as transitional housing. Monica raised the construction contract, the late penalty fees, and tomorrow morning's investor meeting. Adrian told her to put it all on the table, but to propose only a pilot phase before any long-term commitment was approved. Monica opened her laptop to log the directive. In Gabriel's public employment file was an older name once used for a trade license. Monica could not yet open the sealed foster record, but that name was enough to file a legal request if Elena agreed. She read it out slowly, letter by letter. Gabriel Elias Mercer. That surname belonged to a man Miriam had lived with briefly before her second son was born. He disappeared before the child turned 2. Miriam never had that name removed from the birth certificate, though inside room 213, she always called her 2 sons the same way, my boys. Adrian did not say that right away. The name in the employment file was only a trace. It did not give him the right to open a foster record, nor had it yet proven that Elena's late husband was truly the child he had been searching for over so many years. Monica explained that verification required Elena's consent, Gabriel's identification documents, and a formal request from an independent lawyer. Elena looked at the screen, then at Adrian. Mercer was his old surname, she said. Gabriel hated that name. Sophia looked up. She had never heard that name before. Elena bent down to adjust her daughter's hat, buying a few seconds before saying more. Gabriel had once said the Mercer name belonged to a father who never came back. When he was old enough to change his papers, he chose the surname Cole. After the mother, he only remembered through a few scattered images, a blue scarf, the smell of laundry soap, and hands always cold in winter. Does he remember his older brother? Adrian asked. Elena did not answer in words. She unlocked the suitcase, reached beneath the folded clothes, and pulled out a clear plastic envelope. Inside were a birth certificate, Gabriel's death certificate, a few old pay stubs, and a childhood drawing yellowed with age. On the paper were 2 figures standing in front of a door. The taller one held a key marked 213. The smaller one wore 214 around his chest. In the bottom corner were 2 names written in pencil, Adrian and Gabe. Adrian reached out his hand, then stopped before touching it. Elena saw a faint tremor at his fingertips. Since meeting him, she had watched him order the excavator stopped, revoke Walter's management access, and call a lawyer in the middle of the night without his voice ever changing. But in front of a wrinkled sheet of paper drawn by a child, that same man seemed to no longer know where to place his hands. Gabriel drew this at 6, Elena said. He kept it through every move. Adrian looked at the taller figure, the hair colored in black, one arm stretched longer than a knee. In memory, his younger brother used to sit on the floor of room 213, holding a pencil so short it had to be pinched between 2 fingertips. He drew Adrian taller than every adult because he believed his brother could reach anything on a shelf. But Adrian had not been able to reach the car that took his brother away. Sophia stepped closer, studying his face. "Did you know my dad?" Adrian knelt down, but did not try to touch the child. The distance between them was no more than the length of the paper house Sophia was still holding. "When your father was little," he said, "I might have been his older brother." Sophia looked at her mother. Elena did not deny it, but did not nod either. A name, a drawing, and 2 keys could tell the same story. They still did not give Adrian the right to step into her daughter's life, as if 35 years of absence had never happened. Monica prepared the consent form for the record search. Elena did not sign right away. She called the independent law office, read each line over the phone, and asked for a clause allowing the family to retain control of the copy of any records. Only once the lawyer confirmed the data would remain under the family's control did Elena put pen to paper. The request was sent just before 3 in the morning. No sealed record was opened that night. Mother and daughter left Lakeshore for the Harbor Point model apartment once the temporary residency agreement had been revised under Elena's name. Adrian did not go with them. He stayed in the lobby, watching the car disappear from the lot, then returned to room 17. On the table still sat the 3 groups of money Elena had divided, the uneaten apple slice, and the pillow that would not fit into the suitcase. 4 days later, Elena's lawyer received the first confirmation from the county archive. Gabriel Elias Mercer's case code was linked to Miriam Ann Cole. The family notes stated the boy had a maternal half-brother named Adrian Cole, 8 years old at the time the 2 children were separated. The addresses, birth dates, and case numbers all matched. The full record was still being authenticated, but little room remained for coincidence. Elena read the document in the Harbor Point kitchen. Sophia was doing homework at the table. Adrian stood outside the door, not stepping in until Elena allowed it. He carried the 213 key in his pocket but did not take it out. While sorting through Gabriel's papers, a small slip of paper slid out from the plastic sleeve. It was folded in 4, the handwriting on the outside dark at the start of the line, then fading, as though written when the pen was nearly out of ink. Elena had never seen it before. Sophia picked it up first. She read the name written on the outside, then turned to Adrian. "This one says it's for you." Below his name was an old address in Chicago, where Adrian had once kept his first office before leaving it 14 years earlier. The envelope flap had never been sealed with a stamp. Adrian unfolded the outer crease. The first line appeared under the kitchen light. "If you still have the 213 key, if you still have the 213 key, then maybe you still remember me." Adrian read slowly enough that each word seemed to have to travel a very long distance to reach where he was standing. Gabriel's ink was uneven. Some lines were written heavily, others faded, as if the writer had paused too long between 2 thoughts. The letter did not open with reproach. Gabriel wrote that he had passed through 4 foster families before turning 12, had carried 3 different surnames, and for a time was no longer certain whether the brother in his memory was real or something a child had invented just to feel less afraid. He still remembered room 213. Remembered Miriam placing 2 keys on the table. Remembered Adrian refastening his shoelace in the hallway. Remembered his brother's hand gripping his so tightly it hurt, when the social worker said they would only be apart a few days. Gabriel wrote that for years, he had believed Adrian had let go first. Only as an adult did he come to understand that an 8-year-old had no say in which car would take his brother away. Adrian stopped reading. Sophia stood near the table but did not urge him to continue. Elena did not ask what the letter said either. She only watched Adrian's shoulders lower little by little, as though a man who had once stood before thousands of employees was having to relearn how to breathe inside a kitchen that was not his own. The next part told of Gabriel's searching. An address in Milwaukee whose street name had changed. A small Chicago office that closed 3 months before he arrived. An old news article that mentioned Adrian Cole had just opened his first hotel, but did not say where he lived. Gabriel had once stood outside a building bearing his brother's name, holding the 214 key, then turned around before stepping in. He feared he had the wrong person. Feared Adrian already had another family. Feared the door would open and the man inside would look at him like someone come to ask for money. At the bottom of the first page, Gabriel wrote that he had met Elena. From there, the letter carried fewer lines about the past. He wrote about their first apartment, the stove with only 1 working burner, and the way Elena always saved the last portion of rice for him, even while claiming she had already eaten at work. When Sophia was born, Gabriel took the key from around his neck, placed it in his daughter's palm, then put it away again. He wanted to wait until he found Adrian before telling her about the missing half of her family. He never sent the letter. The date at the bottom of the page was 3 weeks before the worksite accident. Adrian folded the paper back up, but his hands could not make the edges align. He had believed himself the only one searching. For years he had blamed himself for arriving too late at each address, never knowing that somewhere else, Gabriel too had once stood before doors bearing his name, then turned away out of the same fear. "Was my dad angry at you?" Sophia asked. Adrian looked at her. He did not choose the answer that would make him easier to forgive. Maybe he was. Sophia looked down at the paper house. But he still kept the key. Adrian took the 213 out of his coat pocket. He set it on the table, a small distance from the 214 in Sophia's hand. The two keys lay side by side for the first time in 35 years. They had dulled in different ways, but the heads, the edges, and the carved numbers were still identical. When Sophia slid the 214 closer, the two brass edges touched with a very faint sound. A week later, the archive sent the complete authentication to Elena's lawyer. The name Miriam Ann Cole, the case code, the date of separation, and the foster addresses all matched. No rushed test was needed to turn what was already clear into a spectacle. Adrian and Gabriel were half-brothers through their mother. Sophia was his niece. Elena received the news in the Harbor Point living room. She did not step forward to embrace Adrian. She looked at Sophia sitting beside the two keys, then at the man who had enough money, lawyers, and power to change where mother and daughter would sleep with a single phone call. "She's your niece," Elena said. Adrian nodded. "That doesn't mean you get to choose for us." He understood at once what she feared. People with power often called control protection, then used gratitude to lock others into a nicer room. Adrian could rent the apartment, pay tuition, buy a house, and make all of it look like kindness. But if Elena no longer had the power to say no, all of it was just another kind of door closing from the outside. "I'm not going to take Sophia from you." "You wouldn't need to take her," Elena said. "Just one lawyer saying my housing isn't safe would do it." Adrian did not argue. He picked the 213 key back up, placed it in Sophia's palm, then closed her fingers around it. "Keep both." Sophia looked at him, confused. Adrian turned to Elena. He said the temporary apartment would remain under her name, with no clause touching custody, no requirement in exchange for silence, and no right for the corporation to enter without permission. Elena's independent lawyer would review any change before she decided. Then he stepped back from the table, did not embrace Sophia, did not ask Elena to trust him, did not open the last fold of the letter, though one crease still remained unread. Elena saw that. She reached for the letter and opened the final section. Inside was a single line Gabriel had written separately, the handwriting smaller and slanted sharply to the left. "If you find my daughter before you find me, please don't save her in a way that makes her mother afraid of you." Elena read that line once more. Gabriel had not written that Adrian should buy his daughter a house. He had not asked for tuition to be paid, an account to be opened, or 35 lost years to be made up for with the kind of things only money could buy. What he feared most was not that Sophia would keep going without. He feared a man with too much power would step in at the exact moment mother and daughter were weakest, then call every decision made in their place a rescue. Elena folded the letter back along its old creases. Adrian still stood a few steps from her. He did not ask what else Gabriel had written. He had perhaps already seen the answer in the way Elena held the paper close to her chest, as though protecting her husband's last words from being turned into another order. The next morning, the investor meeting began at 8. 14 people sat around the long table on the 68th floor. On the screen was a rendering of the new apartment complex, glass balconies facing the lake, rooftop gardens, and profit figures printed in green. No unit was meant for anyone who could not prove income 3 times the rent. No place in the design accounted for a mother who needed 7 days before her next paycheck. Monica presented the decision to pause the demolition and proposed a new assessment of the East Wing. Late delivery penalties accrued by the day. Material costs could rise if the contract had to be re-signed. One investor said the corporation could not change its project just because it had discovered a family living there illegally. Another called Elena's case an unfortunate exception, not enough to reverse a plan 2 years in the making. Adrian listened to all of it. In front of him was the latest homelessness report Monica had asked the research division to compile. In a point-in-time count conducted in January 2025, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development recorded exactly 230,366 people in families with children experiencing homelessness nationwide. That was only the count from a single night. Not everyone who had ever slept in a car, stayed at someone else's place, or hidden a life behind a door they had no right to lock. Adrian set the report down. 230,000 people are not an exception. The room fell silent for a few seconds. He did not mention that one of those children might have been sleeping under a roof the corporation itself owned while still reporting it vacant. Nor did he use his blood relation to Sophia as a reason. If Lakeshore was only kept because she was his niece, every other child without a billionaire uncle would still be left standing outside the door. Adrian requested the demolition halt be extended 90 more days. During that time, an engineering team would assess retaining the east wing, repairing the fire alarm system, the pipes, and the emergency exits. The first phase would include only 8 rooms, enough to test the model before expanding. Adrian personally guaranteed the assessment costs and the initial late penalty using his own equity. Any long-term conversion decision would only be made after the engineering report, the operating budget, and a legal review. One board member asked who would decide which families were admitted, how long they would be allowed to stay, what would stop the program from being a decent place for 3 months before turning into just another bureaucratic system. Adrian looked at the empty chair at the end of the table. He had invited Elena, but did not know whether she would come. The invitation had been sent through her lawyer, with no requirement that she agree with the project. After that night at Lakeshore, Adrian understood that inviting someone into a room did not automatically give them the right to speak. The vote on the pause order and the pilot budget was set for 10 o'clock. By 9:52, that chair was still empty. One investor began gathering his papers, believing the proposal would not get enough votes. Monica closed the financial report, but left the screen on. Adrian checked the clock, then the door, trying not to turn Elena's absence into one more obligation she owed him. At 9:58, the meeting room door opened. Elena walked in, still wearing her cleaning uniform, not having had time to change. Sophia was not with her. In her hands there was no suitcase, no letter from Gabriel, and no 2 keys. She carried only her hours notebook and 4 pages stapled at the corner. Elena did not sit in the chair Adrian had set aside for her. She stood at the head of the table, placed her proposal on top of the rendering of the glass apartments, and said that if they truly wanted to keep Lakeshore, she had 3 conditions before any vote would be recorded. The first condition: those who had once lost a home must hold a voting seat on the operating board, not just be invited in to tell their circumstances before being sent away before any decision was made. Elena placed her finger on the first page. She did not look at Adrian as she spoke. Her gaze went to the people seated around the long table, each with a file, a glass of water, and enough time to weigh the lives of families they had never met. Not an advisory seat, she said, a voting seat. One board member started to ask whether someone living in unstable circumstances had enough experience managing a budget, but Monica looked at him before the question could be finished. Elena still heard the unspoken part. She had met it before in the eyes of landlords, bank tellers, and the manager who altered her hours. The assumption that lacking money also meant lacking the ability to understand decisions involving it. She turned to the second page. The second condition: no family should have to recount the most painful part of their lives in front of a camera, a donor, or a crowded room to prove they deserved a place to sleep. The necessary paperwork still had to exist. Income, children's documents, length of stay, and a transition plan all had to be clear. But no mother should be made to turn her shame into promotional content for the corporation's kindness. No logo inside the housing, Elena said. No reporters on the day they move in. No one required to say thank you in public. Someone at the far end of the table asked how donors would know their money was being used properly. Elena pushed the third page toward him. Financial reports could be made public. Number of rooms repaired, average length of stay, rate of finding, stable housing, and every expense could be audited. What could not be made public was the face of a child sleeping in a car, just so someone else could feel their donation meant something. The third condition sat on the last page. No one would be removed from Lakeshore for missing an appointment, losing a shift, or not finding housing within the exact number of days written on a form. Every decision to end someone's stay had to be reviewed by an independent panel that included at least one person who had once experienced homelessness. Families had to be notified in writing, given the right to explain, and given time to prepare their next place to go. No changing locks while they're at work, Elena said. No putting belongings out in the hallway. No using children to scare them into leaving. Her hand stayed on the hours notebook. Her nails were chipped at the edges from bleach. Her uniform still bore a damp patch near the wrist. No one in the room needed to be told any more about why she had written that condition. Adrian was the first to agree. Monica was the second. The rest did not follow right away. They asked about legal liability, the cost of extending stays, and the possibility of some families taking advantage of the rules. Elena did not argue back with her own story. She opened the budget, pointing out an amount the corporation had once spent replacing the lobby flooring at another, larger hotel, an amount exceeding 6 months of operating budget for the 8 pilot rooms. She compared the contract cancellation fee against the cost of retaining the East Wing's structural frame. She had barely slept the night before. But every figure landed exactly where it needed to. The vote closed at 10:23, 9 in favor, 3 opposed, 2 abstained. The board approved extending the demolition halt, granting emergency assessment funding, and allowing renovation of the first 8 rooms if the structure passed a safety inspection. No one applauded. Elena gathered her 4 pages and said she had not yet accepted any job. If the board wanted her involved, they would need to send a written description of duties, pay, hours, and authority. She could not live on gratitude, nor could she pay rent with a title invented to make a project look kinder. Adrian nodded. You'll get a real offer. And I have the right to say no. Yes. That was the first time Elena looked directly at him without immediately checking the nearest exit. 6 months later, the first 8 rooms of Lakeshore House opened. The East Wing had a new fire alarm system, new pipes, and a widened emergency exit. Room 17 became the night intake room. The small wooden table was kept near the window. Sophia suggested painting the paper house's roof yellow onto a sign, but Elena would not allow her family's name to be hung there. On the door was only one line: no one is left locked out on their first night. Elena took the coordinator position after 2 rounds of interviews and a contract reviewed by her lawyer. She did not work for Adrian. She worked for the Independent Operating Board, where 2 of the 7 seats belonged to people who had once lost their homes. The old hours notebook stayed in her desk drawer, not to remind her how much she had endured, but so that each time she reviewed someone else's pay stub, she would remember to look closely at what had been crossed out. Elena's withheld wages were repaid following a formal investigation. Walter lost his management position, and the records of other workers were reopened. No one called that money a gift. The transfer receipt stated only what should have been there from the start: wages and compensation under a legal settlement. Sophia returned to school regularly. She no longer kept both keys in her pocket every day. They sat in the wooden box under the intake counter, beside the paper house with its yellow roof. Every weekend, Adrian came by but never let himself in. He stood outside, knocked 3 times, and waited for Sophia or Elena to invite him in. The first family arrived close to midnight on the day Lakeshore House opened. A young woman leading 2 small boys by the hand, a black bag of clothes tucked under her arm. She did not cry. She only asked whether they would have to leave the next morning before the boys woke up. Elena pulled out a chair, set a glass of water and a single-page form in front of her. "No," she said. "Tomorrow you'll still have a key." Sophia opened the wooden box. She looked at the 213 and 214 keys lying side by side, then took a new key for room 8 from the compartment below. Adrian stood near the door, not stepping forward. Sophia placed the key in the woman's palm. The woman closed her fingers around it very slowly, as if unused to the feeling of a door being handed over without a warning attached. The 2 boys had already fallen asleep in their chairs. Elena brought a blanket. Adrian bent down to lift the bag of clothes, and Sophia walked ahead, leading the way down the newly lit hallway. When the door to room 8 opened, the woman stood outside for a few more seconds, looking at the bed, the small table, and the new lock on the inside. Then she stepped over the threshold. This time, no one stood behind her to close it for her. And perhaps, sometimes what a person needs is not to be rescued in their place, but to be given back the right to open the door of their own life. As for you, what detail in this story stays with you the most? Share your feelings, or tell us about someone who once helped you or a loved one get through a difficult time in the comments. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.